Welcome everyone to another RearView episode. Today we'll be talking about the 2017 immersive sim game, Prey. Prey has been on my list of games to play for a long time, and I decided that now was as good as ever to take it off my backlog of games. This game has taken up a good chunk of my free time for the last month or so as I've been exploring the game's world and doing everything that I could find for myself to do, and I don't regret any minute of it. Prey is a game that gives you an expansive, interconnected environment, gives you the tools to do what you want, and allows you to do almost anything you can think of within the rules set by the game. This allows for situations where you might feel like you've cheated the game, when in reality you're just discovering another acceptable way of playing it, and I'll talk more on that later, but for now, let's get into the background of the game. Prey comes with some seriously confusing implications. First off, it shares a name with a game released in 2006 which also included aliens hunting the player, but that's where the similarities end. The 2006 title was released by a company called Arkane Studios, and let me tell you, that game is insanely weird and has definitely piqued my interest from the little that I've seen of it. Anyways, if you want me to do a video on that game, please let me know and I'll find a way to fish it out of the abandonware abyss. But moving on, Arkane Studios was going to release a sequel to that game, which ultimately ended up being cancelled due to the alleged quality concerns, and that's actually a whole nother rabbit hole that I'm going to avoid for today. But while Arkane's Prey sequel was being cancelled, Arkane Studios was in early production of their own game entirely separate from the Prey IP. In an interview with NoClip Documentaries, Arkane's founder and game designer Rafael Colantonio talked about how they were having trouble naming their own game until Bethesda suggested that they use the name of the now dead IP Prey. Not only that, but it may have even been the case that Bethesda insisted they take the name, but again, rabbit hole not going down. So there you have it. Prey 2017 and Prey 2006 have nothing to do with each other, except that they were both related to Bethesda and now both share the same name. With that being said, I think it's time we got into the actual game, and yes, for once I will be prefacing with a minor spoiler warning, so if you want to play the game blind, please go do that. If you want my opinion on the game before playing, please stick around, and if you just want me to get into the review, then I'll be starting now. The intro to Prey is like nothing I've ever experienced in a game, and had me hooked right from the start. To begin, you start the game by waking up in your apartment on Monday, March 15, 2032, as a man or woman based on your decision named Morgan Yu. After turning off your alarm, you get a call from your brother Alex Yu, who reminds you to put on your TransStar company suit and head to the roof of the building where a helicopter is waiting to take you to the office where you'll be subject to a few routine training exercises to begin your first day on the job. If you check your emails before leaving, you'll see that your brother has sent you a message saying that your parents are in New York and won't be able to be there when your shuttle departs, and that everyone up there is excited about your ideas. This is one thing that Prey is exceptionally good at. It gives you details about what's going on without having someone or something directly saying it to you, otherwise known as environmental storytelling, which will be a key factor in understanding the situations throughout the game. From this email, we can assume that once we are done with our training exercises, we'll be taking a shuttle to somewhere that is unknown to us for now. Reading a book found in the apartment gives you a little more context for something found later in the game. The book, The Method.sci, details how a new invention, the NeuroMod, can give humans instant abilities or intelligence with just one use of the device, which will be expanded on later in the game. Another fun thing from a book nearby, Hands-on Electronics, is that the author, Antoinette Sokol, is actually a reference to Anton Sokolov, the inventor from the Dishonored series, of which there are a lot more references to in this game. In case you didn't know, both games were made by Arkane Studios. Moving on, after having your fun in the apartment and messing with the physics of the objects, you can make your way to the hallway towards the elevator to the roof. You'll pass by Patricia Varma, a mechanic working on the pipes, who explains that there is a helicopter on the roof that must be for you. If you keep talking to her, she'll ask you if you're going to be late, and then even says quietly,
"You're supposed to keep going,"
which was the first sign to me that something was amiss. Why would she tell me I'm supposed to keep going? What's going to happen if I don't? Either way, I don't ask too many questions and oblige. After traveling up 7 floors to the roof, you find the previously mentioned helicopter running and ready to go. This helicopter ride was somewhat surreal. You get a great view of the city, along with the production and development companies' names throughout the city, ending with the name of the game atop the building of your destination. Arriving at the facility, you are greeted with a floating robot called a science operator, who tells you that it won't be long until you're on a shuttle for Talos 1. So now we have a name for our destination, and we can continue on to the testing facility. Inside the facility is where you'll be introduced to a few basic mechanics of the game, serving as an in-universe tutorial. It teaches you how to pick up and throw objects, how to find cover behind them, how to travel over obstacles, and how to interact with terminal screens, all while the administrator makes offhand comments about your actions, further making you feel like something isn't completely right here.
I'm sorry, can someone please explain to me what's happening? Simmons?
I installed exactly what Tina brought down.
Did you double check?
Speaker's still on.
I really like it when games provide an in-universe tutorial instead of info dumping with text screens and button prompts. It keeps the immersion of the game while also introducing things to the player. Soon after, trouble arises while the administrator asks for his coffee and gets something completely different instead.
It's my coffee. It's empty.
Oh my god! Security! Security!
You're then gassed and waked back up in your apartment, apparently having restarted the day with your clock saying the same time and date as before. If you weren't hooked by the game already, this is where it will cast out its rod and get you by the mouth, because during the next half hour or so, the game will be showing you its true colors. You'll travel outside your apartment and find out the truth behind what's happening. The intro has set you up for a complete 180 and will throw the harsh reality you're stuck in right at your face. You find out that your previous day and many more before that have all been simulations with researchers testing you and observing your actions. There are one-way windows all over your apartment in order to observe and note your actions throughout the day. This part of the game was what really got me. Now, instead of being in a world where I felt comfortable and safe, I was shot into a reality of not knowing anything about anything, not even where I am or who I am. This feeling of not knowing is extremely powerful for the player, as it gives them the need to find out more. The developers knew this and used it to their full advantage, giving the player a sense of drive to move forward. This sense of drive, to me, was coupled with dread and fear because of the fact that I knew nothing of what was going on. Not only that, but the fact that your character you play as is essentially a blank slate and has no knowledge of what's going on also deepens the connection felt between the player and the character. Moving on, you'll find that your apartment building was all an elaborate simulation facility where you can find simulation props around the area and notes on the wall instructing employees how to restart the simulation, making sure to have workers put everything back in the place they were before the start of the day. Throughout the facility, there are signs that something seriously wrong has occurred, as the place has been deserted and left in a state of disarray, another display of the developer's ability to use environmental storytelling. Soon after that, you'll encounter your first alien. This species has been called the Typhons by the researchers, and the smaller variants have been named the Mimics due to their ability to morph into objects near them. This will be the cause of a prolonged trust issue with the game, as you'll be questioning almost every object you find, not knowing if it will morph and try to kill you. If you weren't convinced that your whole life was a lie yet, you can make your way to the room with the helicopters that took you to the TransStar facility and turn off the looking glass, which are the windows surrounding the room projecting the false view of the city outside. Side note, Looking Glass is also the name of a studio that many developers came from to work at Arkane, adding to the fact that the DNA of immersive sim games are well ingrained in Arkane Studios. After disabling the looking glass, you'll find that it's just another room of the facility, made to look like another part of your recurring morning. After finding your way to an office area, you can find a keycard to the simulation lab, or you can go through a maintenance tunnel to bypass the door that the keycard would have opened. This is how the game lets you know that there are multiple ways of going about things within the world. There is never just one way to do something, and you'll be doing a lot of experimenting only to find out that that crazy idea that you had would actually work. There are plenty of times that I thought of ways to use objects or tools in ways that were never explained to get what I wanted from the game. I'll get into this more later, but I love this aspect of Prey and haven't felt this kind of freedom since playing Breath of the Wild or its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, which says a lot about the kind of feelings this game will give you. Now, having gone through the maintenance hatch or the door, you see another taller Typhon variant called a Phantom. These are much stronger and deadlier than Mimics, and I found myself being very afraid of confronting them up until I had the strength to confidently defeat them. Not far from that Phantom encounter, you'll find the glue gun. This gun will prove very useful as the game shows right next to it. You'll be able to use it to build platforms to climb up and walk on to access hard-to-reach areas. There are other uses as well, like slowing down enemies or patching up gas pipe leaks that are shooting fire out of them. This is just one of the ways that the game gives you that freedom to explore or complete tasks in your own way. Not far from that gun, you'll also find your first NeuroMod. These devices, in essence, act as perk points like you might find in another game. Using them allows you to gain new abilities or passive bonuses to use throughout the game, some of which are very useful and give you new tools to expand your freedom of movement and playstyle. An example that most players will use throughout the game is the ability found later in the story, which grants you the same morphing powers that the mimics use, allowing you to turn into an object and access places that you normally would not fit into. Another example is where there might be an obstacle that you can't move without having the appropriate NeuroMod ability, but instead of having that ability, maybe you just pick up some other objects that you're able to throw, and now instead of moving the heavier objects by hand, you can move them by throwing smaller objects at them. It may be slow, and it may feel like you're not supposed to do it, but the game not only allows you to, but I'd even argue that this is how it's meant to be played. The freedom allowed to the player to be able to figure out their own way to do anything in the game is one of the main things that Prey does amazingly well and rewards the player for thinking out of the box. Furthermore, after experimenting with the glue gun for a while and making your way through the starting area, you'll finally make it to the lobby. I loved the intro of the game, and I think it was done exceptionally well. It hooked the player, it gave them questions that needed answering, and it gave them tools to use and experiment with later in the game. The lobby is the end of that intro and the main area of the game. The lobby has doors that lead to many of the other areas of the world, and if it wasn't before, it will now be apparent to you that you are already on the Talos 1 space station that you are supposedly going to be boarding after your training exercises. This area is great for a few reasons. First of all, it's a stark difference to the previous areas you've explored before. Instead of a confined area with hallways and rooms, this is a huge open lobby area rife with enemies and loot. This area made me feel very small and oppressed, and I realized that I'll be having the same feeling with each new area that I'll explore. Having to go through them, eliminating all the threats while trying to gain some sense of familiarity. Which is also the second reason that I think not only is this a great area, but the whole space station is. The station is a completely encapsulated environment that you're able to travel throughout whenever you want. At first, it's a scary feeling not knowing what might be around the corner, but eventually you build a familiarity with the game and its world. However, this feeling will be undermined at times as the game world changes as you further the story, new enemies will appear, and new areas will be available to you as you gain new keys, tools, and abilities. Throughout the entire space station, you will be constantly gaining new things to try out and will feel compelled to backtrack to other areas to see what you might be able to unlock or get past next. This felt reminiscent of a game I previously covered called Blasphemous, as the Metroidvania genre takes complete advantage of this mechanic and is one of the defining features of the genre. I'd also like to add that you can actually go outside of the space station and use your booster to fly around and enter different airlocks throughout the station. Although I mostly avoided this as there are many Typhon outside the station and I found myself walking throughout the interior to get to my objectives more often than not. Additionally, and even supportive to the freedom of gameplay, the game's mechanics allowed for something prevalent in the game called emergent gameplay, which I touched on earlier. Emergent gameplay is a phenomenon that occurs when a player uses tools available to them in-game to create styles of play not intended by the developers. Through the use of tools and abilities in-game, you'll be able to overcome situations by employing solutions that the developers may not have even thought of themselves while implementing the tools that you use to get that solution. This is one of the best aspects of this game and of any games that implement it well, as I've always found that the amount of agency afforded to the player is almost always in direct relation to the rewarding feeling had by the player when experimenting and succeeding in their own way apart from the game's intended way of play. Continuing on, throughout your playthrough you'll also find audio logs scattered throughout the environment which can add some context to what's going on or will just be a recording of a previous event, usually during the uprising of a Typhon crisis among the employees of the facility. Again, this is another thing that I like, and almost never did it feel like the audio logs were out of place or that they shouldn't have been reasonably recorded within the game's universe, a problem I feel with a lot of games that bring me out of the immersion within it. A lot of times these logs will provide some pretty interesting details and will often shed light on the severity of the outbreak along with the emotions felt by the employees. You never feel obligated to pick them up and listen to them. I only did because I like to learn as much as I can about the game's universe. Not only do the logs give you information and context, but also added an element of exploration to my playthrough as it had me wanting to find more areas to learn what I could from the logs and text within them. As you explore, gather materials, gain new abilities, and get stronger overall, you will overcome that feeling of oppression you may have felt in the beginning, and may even be confident enough to run into any room and take on the enemies within. This feeling of progression is constant throughout the game, and I never felt like my progress was stagnating, which can sometimes be difficult for a game to maintain. Another main aspect of the game is the world reacting to your actions and decisions. You'll be met with decisions to make and actions to take that will remain and persist throughout the world as you travel between areas. Items will remain in the position you left them in, and characters you meet will react to actions you've made, making the world feel alive and lived in. This deepens the connection felt to the world and allows for immersion to thrive. Along with finding new tools to add to your arsenal, you might also notice the exceptional designs of the levels throughout the station. Each level is handcrafted and filled with objects that are not just stationary decorations, but tools to be used by you. Any object can be picked up and thrown as a projectile, they can be stacked to provide a platform, and can even be recycled and turned into materials to craft objects in the fabricators found all throughout the station. These fabricators, along with the recycler machines, are the basis of the crafting system within the game. You can pick up objects to put in your inventory, which can then be recycled and turned into any object that you've gotten the fabrication plans for, which are also found around in various places among the station. As you travel the station, you'll find levels done in retro-futurism akin to the 60s era of the United States, or brutalist styles similar to that of the Soviet Union from the same era, along with some Art Deco areas thanks to the rich executives from the TransStar company board. The 60s American and Soviet styles are no coincidence, as you'll find numerous pieces of evidence documenting the history of the in-game world that talks about how the Soviet Union and American governments both worked together on the space station while it was still called the Kletka. To offer a little more context, the game takes place in an alternative timeline where John F. Kennedy survived his assassination attempt and further pushed the space endeavors of the United States while also working with the Soviet Union to push the boundaries of what was possible. The Kletka space station was developed after finding the Typhon species and fighting them off in secrecy to the general population. The station was then used to hold specimens captive and research the odd entities of the cold expanse. Soon after, the station was abandoned by the US government and was bought by the TransStar company to then be renamed Talos 1, later to be used as a research and development facility using the Typhon to develop NeuroMods and gain widespread financial success selling them. Again, the world building throughout the environment and logs add to the immersion and connection felt by the player and gave me all this information to give to you. Finally, I'll talk a little bit more about the story before giving my concluding thoughts. The story, while not the main attraction to the game for me, was also not the least of the bunch. With the exhilarating and captivating introduction to the game's world, I was hooked from the start and felt a great desire to move forward. The introduction to the mechanics of the game was so seamlessly integrated with the story that I barely even noticed I was being taught how to play the game. I thoroughly enjoy when a game can deliver not only the tutorial, but the story without being directly told to the player, and I think Prey does this better than most games that I've played in recent memory. The story, while not the longest, is always engaging and almost never had me reluctant to move the main objectives forward. Not to mention the almost always interesting and rewarding side missions that also impact the ending of the game. This is not to say that the side missions determine which ending you'll have, as out of the 3 endings you will be directly able to choose which one you go with, but the side missions do impact the ending sequence that the game has, similar to something like the Fallout New Vegas ending slides. Which brings me to my last point of the game's story, the ending. The ending of Prey will have you questioning everything you thought you knew, similar to the beginning of the game, ironically bringing you full circle. Not only do you question what you knew about the game, but also every single decision you've made, as your whole perspective is turned completely around. Overall, the story from the beginning to the end was nothing short of the mastercraft experience that you would expect from Arkane Studios, and will have you engaged throughout your entire play. In conclusion, Prey has become one of my top games, which I'm sure you've heard before if you've listened to someone talk about their time with the game before. This is for good reason though. The gameplay is highly rewarding and encourages you to play however you see fit. The complexity of the mechanics within the game offers endless opportunities for experimentation and will always have you wondering if what you're thinking will work out. Emergent gameplay, if you haven't figured it out by now, is one of my favorite things to see in a game and will almost always keep me playing till the end. Prey delivers this exceptionally well and has me wondering what is possible throughout the entire game. Prey also offers excellent environmental storytelling, another thing that I can't get enough of when done well, as seen by some of my favorite games like the Bethesda Titans, Fallout, and the Elder Scrolls series. The environment, while not only a great backdrop for the game, is constantly reminding you that it is not just a static location, but also almost a living thing, reacting to your actions and choices. I was always surprised to see a box that I had thrown or a glue platform that I had shot remain in its place after I'd put it there and come back to it from another area. The environmental storytelling, which remained consistently fleshed out with each painting, each poster, each log, and each display telling a different piece of the same story. had me constantly looking around and taking in the information it was offering. Yet another thing to keep the player immersed were the characters and the side missions, which were engaging and would often test your morals, like with some missions giving you the choice to save crew members or leave them to die. Last but not least, the story of Prey was the icing on the cake. Along with the expansive gameplay, engaging missions and level design, the story gave you another reason to explore different levels, gain new abilities, and get stronger to move forward. The story from start to finish was always engaging and would keep you immersed throughout each story beat while remaining highly memorable. When I reached the ending, I wasn't left dissatisfied, in fact quite the opposite. Even though the ending wasn't what I was expecting at all, that was what made it all the better. If you think for one moment that you would like to play Prey, I would feel obliged to suggest you do. The game set out with high ambitions and delivers on all of them. With that being said, I hope you've enjoyed another episode of RearView. Leave a like if you did, leave a comment if you feel so inclined, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.